It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.
Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of The Non-Profits, the show where we discuss news and topics of the day from a skeptical humanist perspective. My name is Jason, and today, well, all the adults are gone. Yep, you got a bunch of newbies here. You've got August. This is their third show, and Scott Dickie, this is your second show with us, so welcome both of you. Scott, we're going to talk with you for a moment here.
Sure.
What are you doing? What brings you here?
Well, in my secret identity as a math teacher, I've been teaching for, I guess, this is my 26th year. As one of my little side projects, I make a little podcast called God or Not. And I do that with a friend of mine who's a Christian minister, and we kind of hash things out and butt heads on occasion. But we've been working on getting some new episodes for that up and running. So and that pretty much wraps it up for me. I'm grateful to get a chance to come back to the show, and I'm looking forward to talking today.
I'm guessing most of the time it's not.
Well, it depends who you ask. Right?
Excellent.
I'm in the or not camp.
Obviously, otherwise you probably wouldn't, want to be with us. August, same question. What brings you with us today?
So if you've seen me before the last two times I've been here, you know I'm a university student and I'm majoring in a STEM field. And I just want to spread secular humanism and have some great discussions about religious topics.
Excellent. We definitely like your contributions, and definitely appreciate everything that you do with us. So this show is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. And today we're going to talk about 4 different segments here. The first one is Putin's power through faith. Then we're going to talk about the hidden minority of women and Republicans and Southerners who don't really like to talk about how they're atheists. Then we're going to talk about the dangers of rejecting your LGBT child. And then we're going to explore what actually a better religion would be. And as with all of our shows, the links for today's topics are going to be available in the description below. And a reminder that if you want to come into the show prepared, you can check out the Nonprofits Facebook fan page every Friday night. I've actually taken over posting those segments. And so you can read ahead of time and get ready for the show. So let's go ahead and move straight on into our first segment, Putin's power through faith. And Scott, I think you wanted to go ahead and lead us off on that one.
Sure. Yeah, this was from an article found in Religious News Service, or religiousnews.com. The title of the article was Holy Wars, How a Cathedral of Guns and Glory Symbolizes Putin's Russia. And it was written by an author by the name of Lena Sursko-Harned. Yeah, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But basically, what it's about is they are reflecting on the dedication of this new, the main church of the Russian armed forces. And so what they're doing here is it's like, I mean, this comes as no surprise to many of us that have seen this kind of thing before, but they're kind of lumping together the Russian religion and the Russian military, and kind of creating this mythos of this great Russia that's going to reclaim its position in the world. And so it's all about they talk about these pieces of art that display past Russian conquests and Russian leaders, Stalin and Putin, of course, and they're kind of lumping it all together. They're trying to say that as the Russian religion progresses, so does the Russian military, so does the Russian people, that kind of thing. And there was a quote in there that I want to bring up that really stuck out with me. It was the rhetoric for this militant religious nationalism has been on display as Russia threatened to and ultimately did invade Ukraine. During a speech in February, Putin bizarrely called for the denazification of Ukraine. Now, Putin's claim that Ukraine's government is run by Nazis is absurd. However, the manipulation of this image makes sense in the framework of this ideology. So it's all about crafting this militia or this mythology, this ideology that kind of brings together the Russian religion and the military. And when I was reading that quote, the word absurd kind of jumped out at me, and I was like, that's that quote from Voltaire, right? That I'm sure we've all heard. It's anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And so it's like, you know, the Russian military is co-opting their morality and the moral obligation by kind of lumping together the Russian religion and with the rest of you know, what they have going on there. And so what it really does is it's a system of manipulation. We've seen that Putin is not averse to using misinformation and manipulation, and this is just kind of part and parcel with what's been going on with the progression of the great Russia over the rest of the world.
Yeah, and this article was, you know, primarily on how this cathedral built for the armed forces is really kind of a symbol for Putin's Russia. And there's a tremendous amount of symbolism in that. But before I talk a little bit about that, August, what was your take on this?
So I do want to reiterate what Scott said about the clash of religion and military and government here. I think it is an objective fact that anytime this kind of meshing of these two or three different areas of human life, it has not gone well at all. In fact, I would say many, many times it has actually been some of the worst atrocities ever in human history. So I think it's very important to pinpoint that in general, because I feel like many countries still aren't getting the idea that religion and military and government should sort of in some way or another have checks and balances at the very least, if not just separate in their entireties.
And it's interesting you bring up the history because you know, it does seem like, you know, Putin is a great study of history because he basically tries to bring this back to a lot of the great Russian victories throughout history, going all the way back to even the medieval times. But like, so this church that he built, well, not that he built, but that was built for the armed forces. You know, they say it's 75 meters tall, symbolizing the 75th anniversary. This was when they were going to do it back in 2020, but unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, pushed the dedication back. But that the bell tower, 75 meters tall, symbolizing the 75th anniversary from the end of World War II. The dome's diameter 1945 meters, marking the year of victory of 1945. The smaller dome being 1418 meters, representing the 1,418 days that the war lasted. So, I mean, there's a lot of symbology, whether or not anybody actually sees it. I mean, one could argue, well, we've done that with One World Trade Center, making it, 1,776 feet tall. But it does, we built that as a monument to, our strife as well, for 9/11. But we don't go back into like medieval times.
Right. It's real. So what Russia was really doing is they're kind of weaving in these historical stories, and they're kind of combining the historical versions of the stories with the mythology and this idea that, it kind of smacks a little bit about of the way that North Korea kind of does their thing. That they kind of tie this divinity in with the leadership of the country. And August mentioned separation of church and state, and I think that this really highlights one of the important, if not the most important reason to have the separation of church and state, and that is that whether or not it's intentional, religion can be used as a highly effective tool for manipulation. And so if it's put in the wrong hands, we know power corrupts, right? And so if you lump all the power, if you kind of gather up all of the power into a single person, or into a single office, or into a single branch of the leadership, it can really, the temptation, even if we be as charitable as we can as far as what's happening here, we could certainly see that there's a massive potential for abuse here, even if we set aside any actual observations of abuse, but certainly there's potential abuse there. And I think it really shows the strength of the idea of the separation of church and state. And hopefully it would be a red flag, well, pardon the pun, right? Red flag kind of going off to a warning. If we see these kind of things happening in the United States, we see these AR-15 church services, we see the bullet crowns and things like that. And, it really should be a heads up to us, be careful where you tread. Those who don't understand the history are doomed to repeat it. And there's certain things that we don't want to repeat about history.
And just for note, the whole, red flag, obviously Russia is not a communist country anymore. Now, whether or not they stay that way, we'll see how the pages of history fall on that one. But, you make a great point, Scott, on the separation of church and state, because, we've heard not necessarily just internet apologists, but we've also heard certain politicians say that they would kind of prefer a one church, a one God, and emphasize on the one nation under God portion that was, added into the 40s, but we won't go into that right now. But August, I think you had something to say on that, about how it seems like some people want to undo that church and state and aren't sure how to feel about it with Russia.
Right. So something I've been seeing as of late is that specifically the right-wing side of America and American politics, I've seen many of them claiming that they support Putin, and then, I wouldn't say maybe half of them, I don't really know exactly how many, but I have seen both sides of it, where some of them are very against Putin and some of them are, supporting him fully and entirely. So I thought that was a kind of weird dynamic, especially since the right tends to be statistically more religious. I thought that was an interesting thing that I've been seeing recently in the news and different interviews on the street. Obviously, it's more of anecdotal, and so take that with a grain of salt. But I just wanted to see what you guys thought about that.
Well, we can certainly see some cognitive dissonance happening there. If one group supports Putin's actions, and we can also see that the actions taking place in Ukraine today are kind of a reflection of this idea of this, divine destiny of this great Russia. But if there are certain groups that appear to be supporting that type of action, the people in the group, you can almost see it on their faces. You can almost see it on their faces. The conflict, on one hand, they might disagree with what's happening. On the other hand, they're thinking, well, this person that I respect kind of supports that. And so it's interesting to see. I consider myself to be a student of human behavior, right? So it's fascinating to watch. If it weren't so scary, if it weren't so frightening to see this happening, and again, I just hope we can take it as a wake up call. We need to be, there's a slippery slope there to be slipped on, and so we need to make sure that we have strong footing as we go forward ourselves as well.
Yeah, to see the kind of mental and verbal gymnastics that some people are going through, and some people saying the quiet thing loud and the loud thing quiet. It's got to be a really bad time to show your true colors, I guess, because we still have a former president who is very much enamored with what they've done over there in Russia, and with the decisiveness over annexing Crimea, and in a lot of different respects, you're kind of wondering, well, wait a minute, what side do you actually fall on? You don't want to necessarily make it a for us or against us, because right now we don't have a direct dog in this fight, and hopefully we don't. Hopefully it will be resolved. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but hopefully it will be.
Well, you say it might be a bad time to show your true colors, but we could also say now's a great time to show your true colors. I mean, I have a lot of respect for somebody that would stand up to, if they're part of a group that's leaning one way and they say, no, this is wrong. To me, that carries a lot of weight, and and I have a lot of respect for that kind of thing.
And we are seeing that. We are definitely seeing, so many people throw up the blue and yellow of, Ukraine, supporting them for their right to exist, and that's basically what that is. Like, go freedom, support people who want to remain free. Mm-hmm. That's I don't know that anybody who can really say, no, we don't like that, other than people who are for fascism, who are for this annexation, and for the lies, for the absolute vile lies that are being told.
Yeah, and if I may jump in here real quick. So I wonder that I've been thinking about it a little bit. The right wing is also the side that is notoriously associated with patriotism and nationalism. Take that word however you may. But I wonder if Russia started wanting to expand their Great Russia into places either that the United States has like territory in, or just the mainland itself. I wonder if they would change their mind if it became, now they're attacking our country. I wonder if that would change some minds, because I really feel like it would.
I would hope so. Right now it seems that old countries or old territories of Russia are the ones that are being sought after. But that also kind of makes me wonder, is like, okay, so how far do you really want to go into that? Because I'm pretty sure that good portions of Germany would not like them to be taken over again. I don't know. I just have the feeling that, Germany, after being reunified, would like to stay that way.
So we need to keep an eye on Alaska because, of course, you can see Russia right from your step in Alaska. And so it's like right over the border there. So we got to be careful there. Let's keep an eye on. We want to keep Alaska, I think.
Right. And that's why I think it's so, I feel like a lot of people think that this is such a faraway issue when Russia is literally right there.
Yeah.
I mean, the world is round, as we all know, or at least most of us. So like Russia's right there, and I don't really get it, but I guess everyone's entitled. And I wonder if the former president may or may not have any kind of influence in that, because I have seen maybe a correlation between supporters of the former president and supporters of Putin's actions at this time. So that's all just speculation and just from what I've seen. So everyone, obviously do your own research, look up your own statistics, but that's just what I've seen. So I wonder if there's any kind of correlation there, and if people would change their mind if they remember that Alaska is butting right up to Russia.
Yeah, I think Palin was, well, hopefully Palin was making a little bit of a joke when she said that, but it's hard to tell, and that goes back to the whole, saying the loud thing quiet and the quiet thing loud. And I think we're going to be seeing a little bit more of that. Hopefully, this allows, a little bit more bipartisan of saying, no, we need to go ahead and, support freedom. We need to go ahead and make sure that, you cannot just go to your neighbor's house and say, hey, by the way, mindsies, get out. Okay. We can't have any of that. But let's go ahead and get some final thoughts, and we'll start with August.
I think really this boils down to church and state need to be separate. And I understand other countries follow different rules, but being a secular humanist myself and following secular policies and whatnot, I believe that separation of church and state is critical for the progressive world. And we really need to focus on that to prevent at least a portion of these atrocities from happening.
Well said. Well said. Scott?
Yeah, I would just echo what August just said. I mean, it's right. It's happening right there in front of us. There's clearly not a separation of church and state. And so I hope that we can, the rest of the world can take this as a lesson. We can see at least what could potentially happen if we start mixing those things. I think a separation of church and state, I think, is just fundamentally key to having free people. And, I just hope that at the very least, my heart goes out to the people that are directly affected by this. But, if there is anything that can be anything good that can be gleaned out of this, I hope that we can at least learn, what could potentially happen there and not make those same mistakes.
Yeah, we definitely need to have, good pathways to more secular thinking, and just that, decisions when it comes to all people should be made more scientifically, more socially conscious, because the Bible has a very bad track record of, how to treat people. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good wrap up there. So before we go into our next segment, here at the Nonprofits, we do want to thank both our veteran viewers for getting us to the 10,000 subscriber mark. And it was an uphill battle for quite a while, and all of us are so glad that we got there. And what that allows us to do is to run fundraisers. So if you look, if you're watching the live premiere of this, you look under the chat, there's a fundraiser button, donate button. 100% of those proceeds go to help the ACA mission. Google does not take a cut of that in any way, shape, or form. It just goes right to the ACA. It helps us to spread, the positive atheism and promote the separation of religion and government, so that, we don't build churches for armed forces to brainwash them. So, if you're watching right now and you haven't subscribed to us, you need to get on that. Okay. Hit that subscribe button, click that like button. It really helps out the channel. And then ring the notification bell so that you always know when the next episode of the Nonprofits premieres. We all know that it's Sunday at 3 p.m. Central, but life happens. So go ahead and click that reminder just in case you need it. Then share that link with your channel with your friends, your family members, your coworkers, that neighbor guy that you really don't like. Anyone and everyone, let us get the word out. And August and Scott, were you aware, either one of you, aware that the atheist community of Austin has another YouTube channel?
Oh, please
What?
tell us about it. I would love to know. Tell us more.
It's great.
But wait, there's more. There's more.
Check out the Atheist Experience Network, a channel where you can find all the ACA shows in podcast form. So if you're working out, if you're going for a drive and you can't necessarily see the video, or you don't want to for whatever reason, subscribe at tiny.cc/AEN podcast to listen to the episodes of Nonprofits, the Atheist Experience, which is going to follow this show. Give them some love. I'm sure they need it too, not being the flagship of the ACA and all. Secular Sexuality, Talk Heathen, which just came on before this show. Check them out so you don't miss a single episode. All right. So we're going to go on to our next segment, which is the hidden minority, which all of us are, but there's a hidden minority that probably you didn't realize has a little bit of tougher time. August, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. So what we have for this second segment is obviously, as Jason said, the hidden minority, and it is an article by Religion News Service, and it is titled "Study: Atheists Who Are Women, Republicans, or Southerners More Likely to Hide Beliefs." And this was actually written about a week ago by Alejandra Molina. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it goes over a statistic about how women and Southerners and Republicans are more likely to hide the fact that they don't believe in a God or gods. And it's something that I feel we might not talk about as much. I am a woman myself. So it's interesting to see some things that are on there, especially that one of the statistics is that only 4% of people who labeled themselves as non-religious identified specifically with the label atheist. I thought that was incredibly surprising as someone who's been sort of in this community for a few years, and it just had some really good points in there. And I think this is something we all need to keep in mind as the atheist community, that there are certain individuals in our community that are a bit more hesitant to really say their true beliefs. So what does everybody else think about this?
Well, I mean, it was an interesting article, and I'm happy to have read it. It's always, it's always good to see things from a perspective other than your own. One thing that I was kind of puzzled by is that the authors seemed kind of surprised. They one part that they said, the research showed that atheists are the most likely non-religious group to perceive stigma, Yet among people who identify as atheist, agnostic, or simply non-religious, atheists are the most open about their beliefs, which Frost found surprising. Frost was one of the authors of the report. And to me, I was just wondering, well, why is that surprising at all? Well, first of all, they're putting atheist, agnostic, and non-religious. Apparently, they're using them as some kind of gradient or some kind of more or less religious kind of thing, which is there's a whole nother can of worms there. But what they're saying is that people that call themselves atheist are the most likely to perceive stigma, but they're also the most likely to admit their beliefs. And to me, it seems, isn't the act of calling yourself an atheist, isn't that kind of a demonstration of your, that in itself, just classifying yourself as an atheist? I don't ever remember being a believer myself, but I didn't always call myself an atheist. And I do remember, about the time that I decided that I should be calling myself an atheist. Just that act of making that decision was me kind of asserting my position or my lack of belief in these types of beliefs. And so I can see it happening, but I was curious as to why that would be so surprising. I don't know. What do you think?
So the reason why it's surprising is because it really is, as we said at the beginning, it's a hidden minority. And I consider, and I've been saying that I'm a hidden minority for many, many years, because you look at me and you think, oh, well, that's definitely, a well-fed white guy who he's got to believe in gods and guns and all that good stuff. And that's spending 10 minutes with me, you'll find out that that's not the case at all. But I still hold those other privileges that other people just assume. And I get that. For women, I do think it's especially hard because they've got that minority holding over them, and then you start throwing on another minority, and that's why I also think Black people also have issues, coming out as atheists, because then you get their families going, oh, you got to get the devil out of you, and things like that, and there's just complete and utter misunderstandings on that level as well. And so we do need to. I'm not surprised by this, mostly because, well, watching some of our shows, we get to see callers come in. It's like, hey, I'm from this area, and they always talk low because they feel like they're going to be overheard, even if they're in a room by themselves. Like, oh, it's I'm afraid because of where I live. And I just feel glad that I've been in a place where, yeah, there are religious people around me, but I can say I'm an atheist. And while certain people will look at me with dirty looks, they're not going to shun me. They're not going to try to hurt me, as some places could be. August, you got anything you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so I think another thing that I found, I guess, interesting, but to me it was not surprising, I guess, since I have personal experience in this. It said that people who were previously religious and left the faith were also more likely to hide their beliefs. And I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer. If you think about it, many of us, including myself, who were raised in the church, our social life, our work, our school, our family, all of that is meshed and tangled into the church. And then you get into, even the more, I guess, extreme versions of something like Christianity. And then it really, really becomes a problem where everybody around you is religious and everybody you interact with on a day-to-day basis is either religious or they won't admit that they're not religious. And I am one of those people who kind of falls in that boat there. So I really think it's not surprising at all that someone who has more to lose by coming out with their beliefs, that they would be more likely to be very repressed and not want to share how they actually feel with people. And I live in a more or less red area. I wouldn't say it's, extreme or anything, but there are many, many people that I will not really tell that I'm, an atheist, or at least not the extent of my atheism, because I'm worried that they'll cut me off or just not treat me the same. I think there's that unconscious bias. Even if they want to stay in your life, they're going to see you differently. So I think that really was not surprising at all, but it was included in the article, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Did you feel when I don't think we're surprising anyone by saying you're an atheist, right? You're on an atheist podcast. Did you feel pressure to not say anything to anyone, or what was your experience as far as making that step, that apparent, because they're talking about people that don't believe in God, but feel like they're hesitant to say anything. What was your experience with the first time that you said that you didn't believe in God?
Right. I still honestly haven't told a lot of my family, and I feel like they just don't watch this podcast. So I wouldn't really be upset if they found out at this point. I've considered myself an atheist for probably 3+ years now. So I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, all right, this is me. And if you find out, that's fine. I really don't want to hide it anymore. It's a part of who I am. But growing up in a Methodist church, it was a little easier for me to especially tell friends. I first told a bunch of my friends, like, hey, this is kind of how I'm feeling. Many of them are Baptist and Catholic, or just non-denominational or Methodist. And so they took it pretty well, and we just kind of stay away from the topic of religion. And then when I told other people, some of them, kind of just were like let's not talk about it because we're just going to disagree. So I really didn't lose anybody. I'm very fortunate in that at this point I haven't lost anybody. But in the very early stages, that was a real fear of mine, that I just did not know how anyone was going to react. And I have a very mild case of that, I would say. I think some people have it so much worse, especially minors, and they're worried about getting kicked out of their house or their school telling on them to their parents, and the abuse that could happen from that. And it's just horrible. So I consider myself very, very fortunate, but that fear was still there, even in the privileged position that I was and still am in. So I'm just grateful that nothing's happened so far, and I don't anticipate anything happening, which is why I feel comfortable coming on the show. But some people are definitely not as fortunate as I am, which is awful.
And we still see a lot of atheists who, they change their identity in order to have a little bit of a veil. Like they'll still be out there, like you are, August, and you are, Scott. They'll be on shows like this. But they will hide who they are, whether it's because of an area that they live in, whether it's because of family obligations. Not everybody can be as fortunate as Matt Dillahunty, where you're so big and powerful in the atheist community, as it were, that you can just say, yeah, I'm an atheist and fuck everyone else. I'm in a kind of a position where I can do that. My career doesn't depend upon what faith I'm in, and if it did, I have resources where I can say, hey, look, these guys specifically sought this reason to get rid of me, and so I'm lucky there. On the same token, it took me until I was 18 to finally tell my dad. He was pretty much like the last one. Most of my family knew, and they either didn't care or hoped that I would see the light. But I could never, have that conversation with my dad. I've hinted at it, saying like I didn't want to go back to his church because it was so boring. But I could never make that connection where it's like, no, I cannot be a part of this.
It's funny that you mentioned Matt Dillahunty. I remember maybe this was a couple of months ago. There was a caller on the Atheist Experience that was trying to say that I don't know if you remember, being an atheist was a privilege, was a sign of privilege, just being an atheist.
I
And
heard that.
Matt rightly took them to task on the way that they were saying it, but I think that Matt actually said it's being an atheist does not grant privilege in and of itself, but there are groups of atheists that are more privileged than others. And I think that that's what we're seeing happening here, is that some of us, like myself, for example, I try to recognize my privilege, whenever I have the opportunity. I mean, I'm about as privileged as you can get in the United States. I'm white, upper middle class. I'm cisgender, heterosexual male. I live in a bluish state in a metropolitan area. I mean, the most severe prejudice that I feel are, people treat me bad in certain social media groups, or maybe my family is holding me off at a little bit of an arm's length, but for the most part, they've been, embracing of me as a person. But, when I look at something like that, it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Some of us enjoy might not be the right word, but some of us have by happenstance are in a more privileged position than others. And so, and this was something, talking back or looking back to when I first started calling myself an atheist, I felt like I almost had an obligation to do that, to kind of stand at that forefront. Not that I suppose I am kind of trying to toot my horn, but that's not my intention here. But if there are other people that are atheists that, that stack that atheist bigotry or whatever you want to call it on top of I am almost embarrassed to say that I'm in a minority group, because, the prejudice that I feel is laughable compared to, what my fellow atheists feel, that because of so much of other things. So I guess what I would ask of myself and of anybody watching is this getting better? I suppose, August, I would love to hear your thought on this. Do you feel like things have changed over the last, 10 years or however, long since you've come out or recognize that you were an atheist? Or what can what could I do to help, make things better? Or is it better?
So I definitely think someone who's maybe been in this for longer than I have, or someone that is in a more marginalized group, such as, Black people, have a lot of difficulty coming to terms, and well, maybe not coming to terms. And I am in no way trying to speak for them, but I've heard that it's difficult for them to come out. So, I've only been, an atheist for about 3 years, and I still haven't even told I would say probably most people in my life, at least not outright. I just won't say anything, if that makes sense. I guess it's just something that doesn't really come up very much. And if it does, I kind of just keep it to myself. I don't really say anything. But, I don't really know. I think just the awareness, the getting rid of the stigma around it and the stereotypes of, oh, well, you're just a devil worshiper and you're not fulfilling your duty as a person, and, all that other stuff that they like to throw at us, or, oh, I guess you just think life has no meaning. And I think shows, especially like the ACA and all of our wonderful shows that we have, I think we're doing a really good job of trying to bring awareness to this. And I will actually say that the ACA is what was the final stepping stone of me getting out of religion. I started watching about 3 years ago, and it was completely worldview changing. I was already on the, I guess you could say, agnostic side, where I was like, I don't know. Some days I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And then some days I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then I was fighting so hard against the logic that was being brought up. And finally I was just, I can't believe it anymore. And so shows like this and getting the word out and getting subscribers and telling our stories, I think will get more people to feel comfortable. That's what got me to feel comfortable, is seeing shows like this and other, great women hosts, and whatnot on the show, it was completely changing for me. And honestly, I don't know if I would have gotten out without other people to say, hey, this is okay. It'll be all right. Be your true self. And I owe the ACA a lot for that.
That's great to hear. I gotta tell you, I almost didn't want to do this show. And in a lot of respects, I don't want to do the show because there's too much of me. There's too much of Scott. You know, you've got your Dillahunties, and everybody knows them, and you see a lot of this. And August, I do want to applaud you for coming on, for being as brave as you are, and other hosts like Cynthia, and hosts like Apostate Prophet, a former Muslim. One of the reasons why I came to the ACA was not to be on shows like this, but to lift up other voices, because it's not just, we are not going to do it. It's everyone else who joins and who comes into the reasonable way of thinking. And I think that is a pretty good way to end it right there. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break in our conversation. And if you didn't tune in to the ACA last week, here's some stuff you might have missed.
I just caught a flash of my own obituary in my head. Local atheist extremist YouTuber dies in, latex accident. Full body latex accident.
My oldest son has incredible hand-eye coordination from playing video games. I'm not going to ask him whether he's watching porn with brain stimulation, but...
Does that take a lot of coordination? I've been doing it wrong.
No, it's not anything to do with that, Pastor Greg Locke. It's that people get annoyed when someone starts accusing women of witchcraft in the 21st century. That's the explanation I'm going with, not that the devil's getting pissed off because you finally reveal his secrets.
And all the scary stories about, when Jesus comes back and everybody, they walk out of their grave all dressed in as a family.
Right.
Books.
Yeah, it'll be like the Thriller video.
You don't really believe that the cracker actually changes to human Jesus flesh, though, right? Like, you don't think you're chewing on a cracker and then all of a sudden it becomes Jesus man meat in your mouth.
That's a bad cracker, dude. That's what that is.
All right, and we are back. So our third segment, we're going to be talking about the dangers of rejecting your LGBT child. And Scott, I think you wanted to talk about this a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, this third article was a tragic story around the suicidal death of a young transgender person, and how it's being spun. We are talking about an article that's found in the National Review, nationalreview.com, written by Madeline Kearns. And basically the story, and it just came out a few days ago. It was kind of a review of this this panel discussion that was being held by the Heritage Foundation. And the title of their discussion was How Radical Gender Ideology is Taking Over Public Schools and Harming Kids. And they had as one of their speakers was a mother, Abigail Martinez, and she spoke about her transgender son, Andrew, who had killed himself back in 2019 at the age of 19. The first thing that I need to say is that the National Review, the way that they presented the story, they were consistently misgendering and dead naming Andrew, and it was very difficult to just read. It was very grating, and but the way that they presented it, and they had Miss Martinez, the mother, testify on the panel discussion, and she claimed that that Andrew was taken from her by Child and Family Services because, quote, because she was not because she was skeptical of the type of support that Andrew would be able to get as a transgender man. And she kind of presented it as that was, because she was not supportive of that transgender identity, then Andrew was taken away from her at the age of 16. Andrew went into foster care, and then 3 years later committed suicide. And so, and what struck me was during her testimony, she too was referring to Andrew as using female pronouns and using Andrew's dead name. And she would even go to say things like, I had a biased opinion going into this, but it really stood out that it seemed like kind of a methinks thou dost protest too much kind of situation. She would say time and time again, describe Andrew as a girly girl, as a princess, using the female pronouns. And she even said, when she played soccer, she would always run away from the ball. This was her talking about Andrew. When she played soccer, she would always run away from the ball. And we would say, no, go towards the ball. And I was thinking, is because that's what girls do? I think especially in the US, we can appreciate how skilled that, women and men can be at soccer. And, it just seemed like odd, but here's the crux of the article. And this is quoted from the article here. The response of local LGBTQ ideologues who had already done so much to break up a loving family and alienate a deeply troubled adolescent from those most willing and best positioned to help, referring to their family, was to lament that they did not meddle even further. In other words, the Heritage Foundation and the National Review were saying that it was the fact that they took Andrew away from their family situation. They were implying that that's what caused, or at least contributed to, the suicide. And that may be the case. I don't know. I'm not them, and so it's hard to say. But that's definitely flies in the face of the research. And just to quote a couple of studies, these are both from were sponsored by the Trevor Project. The first one was a national survey on LGBTQ youth mental health, and one thing that they found is that transgender youth that are prevented from legally changing their name and legal documents and to reflect their identity, out of all the LGBTQ youth that they had questioned, 25% of them had attempted suicide, not just talked about it, but had actually attempted suicide. And the youth that were allowed to change their name, or that were allowed to change their documentation to reflect their identity, that number dropped to 11%. So already that's kind of going against the grain of what the Heritage Foundation was saying. Furthermore, of transgender youth whose preferred pronouns were not used in the home, 24% of them had attempted suicide, whereas those that lived in homes where their preferred pronouns were used, that number dropped to 13%. So that was both from that same survey. On the other side of that, a separate Trevor Project survey, this one was from 2019, I believe, or around there. They found that if the family avoided using positive terms about their LGBTQ identity due to religious reasons, again, about 24% of them had attempted suicide, whereas if they didn't hear those kind of things, that number dropped to 13%. And so, it really seems to be tying into just the recognition of somebody's humanity. And if the bottom line is it seems, at least from the research that I read, is that if their humanity is recognized and appreciated and respected, then they feel better about themselves. Go figure, right? And if their humanity is cast aside or marginalized or even vilified or demonized, then they have a tendency to feel worse about themselves. And I don't know. It's frustrating to read things like this because my heart just breaks. It's just common decency. You treat a human being like they're a human being, and then go from there. At least that's what the initial take that I got from the article was.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that again throughout history. The fight was against gay people, and then before that against black people, and then before that, and then before that, and it just seems like they need that somebody out there needs an antagonist, and it has to be a group of people. For some reason they need to have that antagonist. But August, what do you feel about this?
So one thing I definitely wanted to point out was that his name was Andrew Martinez. His name was Andrew. And I actually went ahead and watched the video that is linked in the article basically all the way through, and it was hard to listen to, not only because hearing a heartbroken mother who's lost a child, I'm in the boat of I don't think anyone deserves to lose a child. Obviously, I feel terrible for Andrew that, this is personally the language I use, that he lost his battle with depression and was not supported in the way that he needed to be supported. I did feel bad for Abigail Martinez, his mother, only for the fact that I know so many people who have lost their children, and there is almost nothing that's worse than that in terms of grief. So that being said, and I know that's probably a little controversial, and that's me being biased, I think that there's certain things that are not being said here. And unfortunately, and this is what breaks my heart so much, is that we will never know Andrew's true story. We will never know what was happening behind closed doors from his perspective, from how he was feeling, not from someone's retelling and victimizing themselves. That's what it sounded like through her entire interview, panel, speech. She just made herself to be the victim, and then was constantly, as Scott was saying, constantly dead naming him and misgendering him and bringing up non-gender affirming verbiage and language that I can't imagine wasn't also used when Andrew was alive. And I can't even imagine being in a household where my parent is constantly calling my gender identity and who I feel deep down in my core is my true self, and then sitting there and calling it a phase. She constantly calls it a phase, and, oh, you'll get over it. You just like boys' clothes, all this stuff. And never actually considering, hey, maybe this is how Andrew actually feels. Maybe I need to take a step back, put aside my preconceived ideas of what it means to be transgender, and hear it from my child, and put my love for my child above what I think is happening here. And I really like that Scott brought up those statistics, because that's so important in cases like this, is what are the facts? What are we getting down to? Is taking this child out of the home, is that really what caused this? Because I personally would feel a lot more depressed that in the household I was not being considered the person I truly felt like I was. And it's all just speculation. Unfortunately, I know the rest of us tried to find some different articles to see if there's maybe another perspective on this. And that's why I also watched the video all the way. It's just, there's not really much else on this, but it's such an important topic. So I feel like even with the lack of maybe hard evidence that, what actually happened, and not being able to hear Andrew's side of the story, is just, there's nothing we can really do about that other than speculate. But I really am hesitant to think that Child and Family Services would remove a 16-year-old from the house unless there was reasonable suspicion to show that that child was in danger, actual danger. I don't think they would just remove it because there's a difference in, you know what I mean? I don't think they would. So that's the part that I keep sticking on, and the fact that she continues to misgender and dead name him that's just it shows that there's maybe a reasonable bridge between the fact that it was not as sunshine and happiness as she made it seem at home when he was there. So, Jason, what do you think?
No, and I did a lot of looking on this as well, trying to find different perspectives and trying to see if we could actually hear a little bit of Andrew's voice. And unfortunately, with all the looking that I did, and maybe I should have done some more, but when I'm clicking through these different links and I'm seeing experimental lab with liberalism, and I'm just like, wait, what experimental lab are we talking about? We're talking about a person's life. We're talking about a person's identity. We're talking about they took him out of that home and brought into this experimental liberal mindset, and it's like, no, this is who he felt he was. And I echoing what August said, what caused him to be this way, and not to be trans, but to be depressed? What caused him to feel like he didn't have a way out? And we'll never know that. We'll never, it's like, the way that the mother was saying it, it was so happy-go-lucky. No, obviously he wasn't. Now, whether he was hiding something from you because you didn't understand or what have you, unfortunately, we don't get to say. And unfortunately, there are so many more stories like Andrew than there are like Caitlyn Jenner or friend of the show, Arden Hart. Arden comes out as trans, and I'm sure she had a lot of trepidation, and she's touched a little bit on it in her experience, but she came out of it on the other side happy and healthy. Andrew didn't. And we need more stories like Arden. We need less stories like Andrew.
It's truly a tragedy all around.
Yeah. And you mentioned, trying to find out what really happened. I was looking for something like that too. I couldn't find any record of why Andrew was removed from the home. And so that's one thing right off the top, we have to admit, we don't know why that was happening. We can presume that there was some kind of risk, as August pointed out, that there must have been some kind of, they do that kind of thing for important reasons, at least in theory. I did find, however, another article about, so this National Review article referred to a hearing that had taken place, and this took place in California, in LA County, and they did, and this happened shortly after Andrew's death. I believe they said it was actually in response to Andrew's death, but that may have just been there may have been other things there as well. And Abigail Martinez testified during that hearing. There was a public comment period, and she and her and Andrew's aunt. I guess I was assuming that it would have been Abigail's sister, but that's not necessarily the case. It was Abigail and then Andrew's aunt were both testified, and they I found another article by Witness LA, and they were quoted in that article as only using, so this would have happened shortly after Andrew's death and years before this Heritage Foundation panel discussion. But during the hearing, both Andrew's mother and Andrew's aunt used gender affirming pronouns the whole time, and Andrew's chosen name, Andrew. And so it consistently, and they even would hold up a picture and had a rainbow flag on it. And so it seemed like they had embraced Andrew's identity at that time. And the reason for the hearing was to decide whether or not they weren't doing enough to support mental health issues and LGBTQ youth. And so the motion that came out of the hearing was that they needed to evaluate their system and that they needed to implement more programs or more procedures when it came to dealing with LGBTQ youth. And so that to me, it didn't pass. There's something not passing the sniff test here, right? So right after Andrew's death, Andrew's mother comes out in support of more mental health supports for LGBTQ youth, more of what was available, using gender affirming pronouns, using Andrew's chosen name, and so forth. And then years later, now it seemed like two different people talking. And when she was talking, and again, we have limited information here, so I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I at least wonder if was there some coaching going on here? Was Abigail convinced that this would be the best way to help? Would be to talk about your child as your daughter, to use these words. Like I said before, she kept saying things like girly girl, like pretty dresses, typical standard stereotypical feminine qualities, right? And so I don't know, it just seemed like it was a different kind of person. I'm wondering if that's a separate issue, than what the Heritage Foundation was talking about, but it seems like there was something nefarious going on there. And so I too would love to be a fly on the wall and hear conversations that were going on before that panel discussion, or have been a fly on the wall, the reasoning behind why Andrew was taken from the family, that kind of thing. And again, I don't know if that's public knowledge, might be none of my business, who knows, but it's curious, when you see things like tragic stories like this happening, you can't help but want to do something, and part of doing something is going to be to gather information. But I think the article in itself was besides the abrasive way that the article was written, I think it's a good highlight of the kind of thing that goes on. And I approach this type of thing as, okay, here's my chance to learn more. I just want to know more about what it's like to be a human being, what it's like to be a person that's other than me. And that those are the initial steps that we need to have sympathy and empathy for our fellow human beings. I don't know. It was hard to shuffle out what exactly the Heritage Foundation was trying to say. They have the obvious thing. Oh, here's what the LGBTQ ideologues, to use their phrase, what they're doing to our children. And that's kind of the in your face, obvious takeaway. But it just seemed like there was so much more moving parts going on beneath the surface that it was hard to really get a good grasp on.
I agree. And that's one of the reasons why, even though this article is definitely right leaning, I felt like we needed to kind of put our skeptical hats on, since that's primarily what this show is about, is attacking from a skeptical perspective, and really kind of, taking that sniff test and saying, wait a minute, what is actually going on here? This article definitely had a right lean to it. But, I still think it needs to be highlighted as, to see kind of some of the biases in there, in something that, is from a source like this. But let's go ahead and move on to our final segment here. And that is really, what is a better religion? And for this, I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to take this one, if you guys are all right with that.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay. So, if I didn't think that this was a serious article, I would have expected this from something like The Onion. What is better than an extremist religion? What is an authentic religion? And what does that even really mean? And this was this article was from the Desert and it was written by Todd Walsh, and it's all about the president of the Latter-day Saints, having this presentation about, why there's such a bad perception about church, why, the history of different churches and, what they've done. And it's like, no. Those were bad churches. But it also came from the top. We've seen, child abuses getting covered up, all the way to the Vatican. So when you say, you need a better religion, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then we get this really interesting quote from Brian Grimes later on, who's president of Religion, Freedom, and Business Foundation, because those are things that should belong together. It is not religion itself that leads to violent persecution and conflict, but the level of social and government regulations on religion. Here in America, and again, we do have to kind of look at this from an American perspective, because unfortunately in this panel we don't have any international people. But here in America, there really isn't much of the way of any regulations on religion. Religious institutions, they don't have to pay taxes. Their nonprofit status doesn't get revoked when they decide to, endorse a certain candidate. Meanwhile, we have to dance on eggshells. And I get it. You don't want, money going to, say, a certain candidate and being like, no, this is the guy we're going to go with. No. Let them do their own thing, and we'll do our thing by spreading our message the way that we do. But it's so weird, where it's like, hey, if you're dealing with poisonous material, you don't say like, oh, hey, this is cyanide. It's really bad. So let's replace it with arsenic because it's not as bad. I don't get it. Am I missing something here, guys?
No. And I think, first of all, I have to comment here, Jason, your background there is very intimidating with those big eyes kind of saying, okay. But setting that aside,
the better to see you with, my dear.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. But we've probably all seen this idea that the separation of church and state is supposed to, quote unquote, protect religion from the state, not the other way around. But I think, as we saw in our first, in our first segment there, that the mix goes both ways, and so there needs to be a separation there. But setting that aside, this Sister Sharon Eubank, that she was the one who was the primary interviewee in this article. She said she was rising up, right? She wants to call on media to balance their reporting. And this is a quote from her. I would call on the media to balance their reporting, to respect the roles that are uniquely played by religion and faith in society, and share stories of goodness and humanity and faith in God and cooperation. And I got to call bullshit on this, roles that were uniquely played by religion and faith in society, right? This comes up very often on, the call-in ACA shows where, they say, well, what about all this good stuff that religion does? And then the host will almost invariably say, name something that some good thing that can only come from religion. And it's almost universally met with crickets chirping, right? And so it's, the whole idea, first of all, she's working under the assumption that there are roles that are uniquely played, quote unquote, by religion. And so then, if you buy into that there are benefits that can only be had by religion, now what do we do, right? And so it seems like that whenever we see religious groups arguing amongst themselves, setting aside the Schadenfreude or the immature glee that we might seeing religion arguing amongst themselves. But it always seems like it's the more quote unquote authentic religions, or the more I follow Jesus's teaching. I'm not a Christian or whatever. It seems like whenever those types of arguments happen, or disagreements or discussions happen, the side that is presenting themselves as the more appropriate, or the more authentic, or the more real religion is almost always the side that is kind of pulling away from these foundational doctrines. And so it seems to me like if they're always claiming that the better religion is really just less religion, then okay, let's follow that logic. If the better religion is the less religion, what's the best religion going to be? And I think we can all see where that goes. If less religion is better, then the best religion is
the none religion.
But it's frustrating. It's frustrating seeing, first of all, that moving forwarding the conversation as if we all assume that there are these wonderful things that can, and sure, many religious people and many religious groups do great things, do wonderful things. They help people. They help build up the world. They might support science. They might support good things, things that we would all agree on. There's a lot of things that we can all agree on. But the hitch there is that, does it really need to be attached to the rest of it? Is this something that only religion can do? And like I said before, or at least what we've heard from callers into the shows, is that, I don't know, is there something that has to be tied to religion, or is there goods that can only come from religion? Anyway, that was kind of what stuck in my craw, I guess.
Yeah, August, what do you have to say on this?
So I actually audibly groaned, and at one point when she says faith is actually the answer, I actually yelled out, "No!" I got this article was hard to get through because, like Jason said at the very beginning, it almost seemed like this belonged in the Onion. Like there's no way someone could actually believe this nonsense that, oh, something's bad, so we should just make that a less bad version of the bad thing and then act like everything's cool. And I'm sitting here like, what about secular humanism? The thing that literally everyone can follow, whether they believe in a higher power or not. It's the one, really, I can't think of anything else that could be so unifying of everyone of any different belief. I even feel like maybe a religious person could still follow most of the things that a secular humanist would follow, treating people like you would want to be treated and considering what produces the best well-being for the most amount of people. I think that's just universally a good method to go by. I don't understand why we have to say that, okay, well, this imaginary thing was really bad, so let's pick a different imaginary thing, or we'll make the imaginary thing more real. I was just kind of scratching my head at that. Wow. So I also think that I know a bunch of other hosts I've heard say this before, that religion is kind of harmful, even if you're just considering the fact that religion places its entire worldview in the lens of what us atheists would argue is highly implausible, if not just downright wrong. And we can provide reasons for why, or at least reject the reasons that people give us for believing. So even if these religions are doing all this nice thing for the world, they are still basing their worldview off of something that it hasn't been proven to be true. And every attempt at trying to explain its validity has been shot down using logic and whatever else. And secular humanism, it always comes on top. And I like what Scott said as well about there's nothing that religion has done that has benefited the world that an atheist or even just someone who didn't do it for the sake of religion couldn't do. So I don't it baffles me. It's wow. wow.
Yeah, like you'll get people who say, "Oh, well, what about the charitable works?" And it's like, okay, well, if you feed 100 homeless people, but in order to feed that homeless person, you make them go through an hour-long sermon. That's not doing good. That is forwarding your own sense of what you think morality is. You can you I would challenge any church that does anything like that, and I know there are churches that don't, but if your church, if you're watching this and your church has a sermon before they help somebody, or has a pamphlet that they have to get out, I would challenge you to do that same thing without the sermon, without the pamphlet, and see what happens, and see if it still makes you feel like everything is still, you're still doing good. And then tell me if that was the religion or you just not being a prick.
And it's preying on vulnerable people as well. They say they do all this charity work, and then, like you said, they're handing out the pamphlets, or they're saying, come to our sermon. And then it gives that person a sense of community that they may not have had before. And it sucks them in when they're presumably at one of the lowest, if not the lowest points in their life. If they're, homeless or hungry or anything of that nature, they're preying on the fact that these people may feel hopeless or helpless, and they just don't know what to do with their life. And here's some nice person now telling them that there's somebody who loves them and the higher power, and blah blah blah. So I also think that in and of itself is pretty, can be argued that it's pretty immoral to sit there and prey on someone who is just wanting help. Why can't you do the same thing without trying to recruit them to your religion and your way of thinking? Just give them the food, just give them housing, or money to get them on their feet, or a job application, or whatever it may be. You don't have to sit there and say Jesus loves you whenever you do it. You know what I mean?
And that God gave you all these things. And it's like, no, there were people who gave you those things.
Well, I think we would be remiss if we didn't point out, and this is certainly true for any Christians or any other religious people that I know of, for that matter. When we say that, there's kind of a bait and switch going on, or, we're implying that, you can have this meal with you if you do, and then we're say, you have to go to the sermon. I think it's worth mentioning that, the people feel that they're doing that because they think that's the right thing to do. That, they think that bringing somebody to God is going to help that person. And,
right.
and so it's not, and you mentioned morality, and I think that definitely applies to many religious people, but I think we need to be careful not to paint all religious people with that brush. And
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
so,
I 100% agree with that. And
Sure.
I apologize if my previous wording made it seem as if I was painting
Yeah.
every religious person who does charitable acts. I know that a good majority of them really think that they're saving someone for eternity and that they're really helping someone. I just want to make that clear, and I'm glad you brought that up, Scott, because I'm glad I could clarify that.
Right. Yeah. I didn't think that that's what you meant. But again, we want to, I think it bears mentioning and clarifying. But I think that underlines it, the point. And I don't necessarily speak for everyone here, but I'm sure that there's many people watching that would say that it's not so much religion that we're against, it's being irrational, right? It's having these unfounded beliefs. And Jason, you were mentioning that, if you have these unfounded beliefs, then, that's the problem there, right? That's the core problem. Yeah, it's fine to do these wonderful things for other people, and to do it in the name of Jesus or Allah or whatever. But the baggage that comes with that is not so much the religion per se, but the fact that the religious beliefs are unfounded. And there's the damage. If you promote unfounded beliefs in one aspect, then you're kind of opening the door a little bit for for other things too. And so I think that's worth keeping in mind as we look at these types of things that happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that has almost been 90 minutes. Can you believe that?
Time flies. Time flies.
Flew by.
Flew by. Absolutely. So I think that's a good place where we can go ahead and start wrapping up. So for everyone else, you can join our fan-run social media outlets. You can find most of the nonprofits hosts on the atheist community of Discord by going to tiny.cc/acd Discord, and on Facebook at tiny.cc/fbnp. We're definitely trying to get a lot more going with that, with the articles, and just get more discussions with our fans. Also, if you would like to support the show, you can do so becoming a patron at tiny.cc/patreonnp. And as always, well, we do value your feedback. You can tell us what you like, what you don't like, down in those comments there. I know you will. Some of them are good. Some of them are kind of like, well, okay, yeah, that's great. We'll work on that. But you can also email us at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. So I feel like this has been a pretty good show. And let's go ahead and get some of our final thoughts. Let's start with you, August.
Sure. Separation of church and state. Transgender rights are human rights, and we need to affirm people's genders and prevent depression and suicide. I think that it is absurd to think that a cure to bad religion is better religion. And everybody stay safe and have a great night.
Absolutely. And Scott, your final thoughts?
My final thought is ditto. Everything that August just said, I firmly agree with, and I just want to thank everyone for letting me come and hang out here for a little bit. It was fun talking with both of you, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thank you both for coming on. I know this has been a little bit different, all of us being fairly new in what we're doing, but I think we muddled through pretty well. And my final thoughts are just be kind. Just be kind to each other, because we're really all that we've got. So for the atheist community of Austin and the nonprofits, I'd like to thank all of our audience members for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/ytth and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.